Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, welcome to the...
Go on, Jack, sorry.
Welcome to the Team House, guys. We're here tonight with our guest, Ben Milligan. He's the author of By Water Beneath the Walls. It's a history of America's maritime commandos, essentially, maritime commando capability from World War II to, we say, the end of Vietnam, and then kind of talking in a little bit into...
I cut it off and right about 72. The epilogue takes us up to 76, but yeah.
I still got like 50 pages to go on this book, but I've really enjoyed it. And thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, Ben, for joining us in studio, man. It's awesome to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to start, with the first half of the interview, talking a little bit about yourself and your career, because you are a former SEAL yourself. Right. What was your life like growing up, and what was sort of that pathway that took you into the Navy?
Do we have enough whiskey?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I'll start here. I think, like probably both of you, I'd always wanted to do it. I mean, not always wanted to do it, but you hit that 10, 11, 12 age, and you start looking around. And I had a very close relationship with my mom's dad, my grandfather. He had been a Marine in World War II. At a young age, I always kind of knew that I wanted to be a Marine until I found out about Navy SEALs, and then that's all I could think about. It went. I had a great family. My dad was a ear, nose, and throat surgeon. I had two brothers and a sister, but nobody in my family, short of my two grandfathers in World War II, had ever been in the military. So I think the first time I or anybody in my family had talked about the military outside of my grandparents' context was I was sitting at the dinner table like 12 years old, and I announced that I was going to be a Navy SEAL. I don't think anybody had ever heard Navy SEAL in my house before, and so they just kind of looked at me. And I was like, but through junior high and starting into early high school, I had made it pretty clear that I wasn't going to go to college, which is for a doctor's kid, that's not okay. So it led to some pretty energetic arguments. And then I just stopped talking about it. I didn't talk about it for a couple of years at least. And it didn't really come up again until my senior year of high school. I was supposed to be coming home from a practice. I think it was a soccer practice or a track practice. And I didn't show up. And I think my mom just had some sense, and she drove to the recruiter's office. And there I was, and I was getting ready to, sign in. I just turned 18. She must have known. And the recruiter, to his credit, like right before I signed, he was like, "Do you know that woman?" She had, both hands on the glass, sobbing. And so I went. We went out to the parking lot. We had an adult conversation. She said, if I would do 1 year of college, and I didn't like it, then they would have, or I would have their blessing to join the military. I think my parents knew who I was. They knew me. Always knew that I was kind of a bookish kid, and they knew that college would grab me. And it did. Once I got there, and I discovered that you could go to classes all about World War II. I was hooked. So I was hooked at least for 4 years. And 4 years came around. I was a history major in college, and what are you going to do with a history degree?
Be a teacher.
Yeah, I wanted to be so that's what I did.
So you did your 4 years. You graduated. Did you go and enlisted, or you try to go officer?
Yeah, I tried to go officer. I was I went through the OCS recruitment process, and I did all the. They were the recruiter knew that you were going to have pretty high scores to compete with Naval Academy guys and ROTC guys. So my PT scores were pretty great. I mean, I went a whole year doing 3-a-day workouts and never took one hot shower in that entire year. And I put what I thought was a really good officer package together. I had. But I didn't know. I'd never met anybody in the Navy. I didn't have anybody counseling me on how competitive it was to get in. So my letter of recommendation for leadership was written by my high school soccer coach. Like, you need like an admiral or like a senator or something like that. I was pathetic. I mean, it wasn't pathetic. It was a really nice letter, and I still I appreciate it to this day. But I was out of my depth. So the application went in. Predictably rejected. Sorry. And so then I had another serious conversation with my folks, and my dad at that point was like, I think this is something you have to do. And I went over to the enlisted recruiter's office, and that's what happened.
Did you have a contract?
I did. At the time, it was called the SEAL Challenge contract, and I think I'm going to have one of these.
Yeah, please. And what year was this, by the way?
2000.
Okay.
Yeah. So had the SEAL Challenge contract, and then it was pretty easy after that. I mean, I'd gone through months and months with the OCS recruiter, and then I assumed I was going to have to start all over, with the enlisted recruiter, and it'd take months and months more. I think it was 5 days.
Yeah.
And I was on a bus going to Great Lakes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The great mistakes.
Which you've been to.
I have not. I actually went to San Diego.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, for both.
I'm not sure
Navy and
that's
Marine. So
yeah.
It was. No, I didn't have to deal with any of that weather.
Cheers, by the way.
Cheers. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Did your you mentioned that your mom's dad was sort of very influential, but both of them had both of your dads had been in World War II. Did they counsel you to or to not join? Did they have feelings about it?
I mean, my mom's dad, who I had the particularly close relationship with, he was I think he knew that I was going to do that, and he was supportive of it. My other grandfather, he'd been in the 12th Armored Division. He and I hadn't. I don't recall him and I talking about it. I think he was, supportive. I think most people were just confused. My two grandfathers were. I mean, my Army grandfather was more confused about what the SEALs were.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's not confused anymore. I mean, he went to my graduation and everything. But they were just.
That's fantastic, though. Did both of them make it to graduation?
They did. Yeah, they both
That's
did.
great.
Wow.
Yeah, I
that's
was
really
22 years old. So the one that the grandfather I was very close with, he passed away just in 2016. He was 102. Wow. Yeah, and he swam every day until he was 98. And so the interesting thing about that grandfather, so he had not only he had been a Marine, he'd been a Marine artilleryman, fought in Guadalcanal. He'd trained on Guadalcanal and fought on Okinawa. But after fighting on Okinawa was secured, they were looking for anybody that could swim to join the underwater demolition teams. And at that point, I didn't know this at the time, when I was learning this family lore, but I knew that, they needed lots and lots of swimmers to, lead the way, for the invasion of Japan. So they needed everybody that could swim, Army, Marine, whatever. So he was a Marine volunteer for the UDTs.
Oh, really?
So he did 3 weeks of
That's crazy.
underwater demolition training. Yeah.
When you said that, it just reminded me on Monday I interviewed a World War II veteran, this guy John Luckadoo, who flew B-17s over France and Nazi Germany, and He has actually, his book came out this week. If you guys want to check it out, and I'm trying to recall the name, the title of the book. I'll look it up for you guys later. But anyway, you reminded me of that because this gentleman, I don't know how old he is at this point. Must be in his 90s.
Has to be.
Totally articulate, sharp, right there. I was like, I hope I'm like that at this guy's age. I hope I'm like your grandfather, and you're doing episode 5,000 of the Team House.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, it was great to go to his 100th birthday.
Yeah.
After his 100th birthday, things started to take. It was yeah, it was rough to see him. But he and I were. I mean, so not only did I get the sort of the motivation or early interest in the military from that relationship, but he was a really disciplined reader, and really, his main focus was always American history. And when I was in, and I don't know how that relationship, happened, or how, I think he just saw, the same sort of interest in me. So when I was in junior high, so right about that same time, I was, deciding that I was going to be grow up and be a Navy SEAL. He started taking me every fall break to a different Civil War battlefield. So I, right at that point, it's a really critical point, I think, at 12, 13, 14, when you really start thinking about what you want to do when you get older. So I knew, one, that I was, I really wanted to be a frogman, but I also was really interested in history, and I wanted to write, and I wanted to read, and I wanted to, so.
Yeah. Now, he never at any point in time gave you shit about going Navy?
No, he was, I don't know when he found out what the SEAL teams were, but he was, he thought it was the coolest thing.
That's great.
He also liked my ponytail, though. He was encouraging of that, so maybe he was just a really encouraging grandfather. He was the best.
What was it about the SEALs versus like Force Recon,
Right.
Special Forces or whatever else? Like, what was it? What was the allure for you?
I think there were two things, and I think I think there was this reputation that, one, the SEAL teams, or BUDS was the hardest thing that you could do. And that was always something I was a bit self-conscious about. I mean, I didn't really know if it was the hardest curriculum out there. But two, I think it had this reputation because of the, even going back to the acronym of its name, Sea, Air, and Land, that SEALs go everywhere. Which I just assumed it was true. And then, I think that was reconfirmed during Desert Storm, when you see, I had a Newsweek of special forces type guys right when Desert Storm was happening, and there were SEALs in dune buggies with grenade launchers and machine guns. I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do.
That's awesome.
Driving around in the desert with your best, your two best buddies, and yeah.
So, before when we've had people on the show and we talk about the various selections and what the mindset is going to selection, one of the things that comes up is the people who are inevitably successful are people who really, they never even considered a possibility to quit. It's just what they have to do to get to where they want.
I thought about it.
Did you?
I mean, it crossed the first time I hit that water, and there was a moment, in Indoc, where I was, I couldn't. It was January when our bud started, and phase 1 hadn't even started yet.
Yeah.
And I hit that water, and I was like, "You got to be kidding me!"
Yeah.
And we were in there for 30 minutes doing like a acclimation, surf torture type thing, and then I knew we were going to have to get out of there and go right to the pool and do 2 hours in the pool. It's like, well, this seems ridiculous. That was I think that was the only time I thought about quitting. But I mean, if you can get through that one time, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And
And how many guys? I mean, I don't know if you've brought guys on here in the past who have quit something and then come back for a second chance. Like, I know several guys, several SEALs that have gone through, hasn't worked out, then they've gone back for a second time. I went through BUDS, and I was, first time every time. I didn't fail anything, and my career was relatively short-lived. I did 7 years, active duty, and then, but some of those guys that had trouble, I noticed that came back for a second time. Some of them are, incredible. They really know how valuable it was. I mean,
Yeah.
it really meant something to them.
Yeah.
To have that taste of failure in their mouth, they never want it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also, I think that they go to the fleet and they realize that they don't want to be there. So
Right.
it's like, get me out of here.
Right. But I think they're, the guys that, for those guys listening that, maybe something doesn't work out right away, and we can talk about this later, but, the characters that in the book that I discovered, like, I would say 90% of the characters that I found, they all started on their path expecting to do something. And then the rug gets pulled out from under them, or a new opportunity presented itself, and they find themselves doing something that they never expected to do. For what it's worth.
Yeah. No, I mean, that type of flexibility, though, or seizing opportunity when it comes up, in lieu of this is the plan, well, this didn't happen, and, let's readjust now. I mean, that kind of is a hallmark of like special operations,
Absolutely.
forces, and the people who start them, really, I think.
I definitely have known a few people who failed out of Special Forces selection or the Q course and ended up in like some sort of like special access program that Special Forces guys wish they were a part of. It's weird the way that works.
Well,
sometimes.
I think there's also, I don't want to make a huge generalization, but there's also, a lot of times in a selection course, it is the luck of the draw. Are your shins going to hold up? Are your knees going to hold up? Like getting injured or not passing an event, sometimes that's just not in our control, within our control, do you let that moment crush you, or do you find, do you make a new way?
Absolutely.
So you went into the Navy in 2000. So you were kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like young frogman when 9/11 kicked off.
I was in, I had just graduated BUDS. I just finished airborne school. So you graduate at the time, the pipeline's different now, but it was at the time it was graduate BUDS, go right to Fort Benning, and you do Army Airborne. So we all expected, we're going to war. Didn't quite work out that way. It was a bit more jagged timeline for me, but we showed up. I packed, 9/11 morning, I packed my bags, was ready for a recall, and then I found myself getting no call, reporting for, SQT or SEAL qualification training, right as scheduled. But yeah, it definitely took on a much more, serious or, yeah.
So what was that path like after, you got your Trident, you get to a platoon? What was the next step for you?
The next step was SEAL Team 4. I went to a platoon that was going nowhere near the war. We were assigned to an ARG platoon or a MARG, and we were in the Mediterranean, mostly in the Mediterranean. It was based out of Rota, but we would bounce from ship to ship doing various missions. We ended up, the most exciting thing that we did was support the whatever the mission was in Liberia, the second civil war with Liberia.
There's an embassy evacuation, right?
There was a embassy evacuation. We did a series of like hydrographic reconnaissance missions there. It was pretty cool. And at the time, if there hadn't been this other stuff going on,
right,
in Afghanistan and Iraq, it would have been,
Liberia.
We were doing the thing,
right?
Yeah. But and not only that, but that platoon. If that platoon had come later in my career, and I'd seen, it would have been incredible, getting to see these cathedrals and museums and everything that we got to see in Spain and everywhere else it would have been
But you guys were probably concerned, like everybody else, that didn't get the initial
gonna miss
deployment.
it.
That it was going to be over.
Yeah, we're gonna miss this
It's going to
thing,
be over
I
in
mean.
3 weeks, and that'll be it.
Yeah, we missed. I mean, at the time, we missed Afghanistan. Nothing was going on in Afghanistan after that. Things were going on in Iraq, and we were, finding out, about that, and just, getting sour grapes the whole time.
Well, lay on us what that hydrographical survey was like, because that'll dovetail with what's in your book too. You finning towards shore in the night. I mean, this was the real Frogman mission, that it was everything you wanted it to be.
It was cool, and it absolutely did come back to help writing it. I mean, so much of Buds is doing. It's almost Buds is almost a metaphor for the evolution of naval special warfare. You start with that conditioning phase. It's that Hell Week, and all the guys that were inducted into naval special warfare, even from those early times, they're doing all of that conditioning and all the misery of Hell Week and everything like that. And then you go into this water phase with or dive phase and everything, which is sort of the direction that naval special warfare went to after World War II. The expectation for planners is that the future of the underwater demolition teams is not going to be on land; it's going to be in the water. So we need to get really good at going deeper, farther. Putting bombs on ships and doing disabling mines and all the rest. And then, that metaphor, you go ashore and you go on land, and that's kind of how, my career went. It was, the training phase, and then, the Liberia phase. And Liberia was, it was interesting. I mean, I doing all the academic stuff that we had done in Buds, and, actually prepping a hydrographic chart, just like the guys, not just like the guys had done, if you're plotting a beach approach to Saipan, but not too dissimilar. I mean, it was, we were doing, at one point we did an online hydrographic survey, of a beach right outside the embassy there in Monrovia.
And what does that look like? Are you like
For
measuring the
a good
depth?
swimmer or a bad swimmer? Because I was a bad swimmer. But
For anybody, for both good and bad.
there was a guy in my class who Phil Sandberg, he's now out of the teams. He was a kid from Minnesota. He was, we had Olympic, close to Olympic caliber swimmers in my Buds class, as almost every Buds class is. This kid he'd come from the fleet. Before that, I think he'd been on his high school swim team. But you look at him, he's not, a particularly, muscular guy. I mean, he's a little roomy, but like when he got in the water, he was incredible. Mm-hmm. And our Buds class, he had, they have that, the surfboard on the wall in the second phase classroom, and on that surfboard at the time there were like 10 swim pair names on it. Everybody, every swim pair that had finished the 7-mile swim in under 3 hours. He'd crushed the swim. He and his swim buddy got on the swim board, or on the surfboard, but he was there with me on that hydrographic survey in Liberia. So being an incredible swimmer, he had gotten the hardest position on that swimmer line, which is the furthest one out to sea, away from the beach. I had barely made. I'd almost gotten dropped from Buds because of swimming. I had to train every weekend. So Buds, a lot of people don't know this, but you get the weekends off in Buds. So when everybody was recovering, I was at the pool trying to get faster and faster because I was comfortable in the water. I just didn't know how to swim fast.
Right.
So when I got into that first platoon, I had the position, the closest to the beach. I was, supposed to be swimming, through the surf, which, wasn't supposed to be bad, but there was a really intense shore break on that particular beach. And the most humiliating / awesome Frogman story that I have was, I got tangled up in my lead line, there was nothing I could do, and there was nothing to, really measure with my lead line anyway. So I find myself, I couldn't swim because I was wrapped up in this thing. I had to pull my, my dive knife out, and I'm cutting myself out of my own, swimmer line. And I find, this wave is about to crash on me. I don't know what to do. If I put my knife back in the sheath, I'm going to stab myself in the leg. So what do? Put it right in the mouth. Dive through the wave. So, and there were CNN, photographers on the beach. So if you
Very
dig,
nice Hollywood moment.
it was the coolest thing I've ever done.
Yeah. So have you seen a picture of yourself?
We made the cover of USA Today. My mom swears that I'm on the cover. I'm not, but yeah, we're on the cover of USA Today. That platoon anyway. It was pretty cool.
So what was the next jumping off point for you from that mission in the Mediterranean and obviously Western Africa?
Yeah, I got out for a brief period, and then I came back and found myself in a platoon with SEAL Team 5 and Al Anbar.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it was kind of everything, I had expected, and it was it was the quintessential SEAL deployment. A lot of sniper overwatch missions, a lot of direct action assaults, culminated with a pretty good ambush of the platoon, and it was good. It was intense. It was a good.
It was everything you sort of wanted to get from it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that wanted is. I mean, it was everything you kind of you would expected to get. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys probably felt something similar. It was a great platoon, and it was. I mean, but yeah, I mean, at the time, it wasn't probably too. It wasn't at all dissimilar from what other SEAL platoons were experiencing. But it was sort of the first time that I started to think about, what were we doing here, and I should step back. So there was a period where I got out. I left the Navy. I did some contracting, security contracting in Iraq, and got to work with lots of different, special operations types. Worked with a lot of Rangers, a lot of Marines, Green Berets, and it was sort of there that I started to realize that, there were other units out there, and they all looked at us weird, or they all looked at us like, "What the hell are you guys doing here?" You know what I mean? Like, I know you guys have thought it, at some point, and it was probably there.
Not once.
I think to be fair, I mean, yeah, I think that what you're alluding to is like you guys are a maritime commando unit. Why the hell are you
1 foot in the water?
Yeah, why are you in this sort of landlocked country?
Why are both feet on a mountaintop?
But to be fair, I mean, after 9/11, every special operations unit had to exceed their mandate and ended up doing things that they weren't necessarily training to do beforehand, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
I assumed that was the reason that our mission had expanded. That was the reason that my experience in Liberia had, shifted to this experience in Iraq. I would have continued to think that if I had not, done that.
All right, we'll get.
But we'll get into that.
We'll
But
get
yeah,
into that.
but I mean, it was, and it was it was an experience completely divorced from, the water from the. Oh, what are we doing?
I got to give a shout out to our sponsors. Dave, you want to hit up Chill Boys?
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, if you like your boys staying cool and chill, if you like your boys staying chill, check out chillboyundies.com. They make these really awesome like bamboo cotton briefs, boxer briefs, nice socks, long johns, good stuff. That's chillboys.com. I mean, they are really, really comfortable, especially with summer approaching. You don't want to get the funk going on down there. Chillboys.com, promo code TEAM15 for 15% off your first purchase. That's chillboys.com, TEAM15 for 15% off your first purchase.
And our other sponsor for today's show is Orca Coolers. And I got some merch here. I won't insult our guest, giving him the U.S. Army mugs. These are Orca Coolers. I got this one. This is more agnostic thermos for you.
Hey, all right.
What is it? Is flowers?
I think it's
Butterflies?
flies.
They're
like
Fly fishing, yeah.
Oh, that's a nice thermos.
Yeah, Orca Coolers, guys. OrcaCoolers.com. If you go there and check them out today, you can use the promo code TEAMHOUSE20 to get 20% off your order. I mean, they make obviously thermoses like this, and we also got this huge U.S. Army cooler here.
Oh, that's nice.
You can take to the beach, load it up with some brewskis.
It's got wheels. It's got a pull handle. Oh, does it have wheels?
No.
Oh, it's okay, but it's got the handle to carry it. That's nice.
Do you have chill boys for?
I don't have any undies for you. I'm
I
sorry.
have a pair, but
You want to lend? You want to lend Ben yours?
Man, look.
Let's swap them.
I was a corpsman in the Navy, so nothing's out of my lane.
We have established with previous guests that it's not gay if you're underway.
Right.
We've talked about this.
Right.
We've talked about it extensively. Maybe more than we should.
Have you ever been underway?
No. I'm sorry.
It's a hoot.
I'm sorry. I'm sure it was. I feel like I missed something.
My favorite underway story is I was. You guys haven't experienced it, but they'll do like a sweeper's call like every hour.
Like on the carrier deck?
No, just like
Sweepers, man your brooms.
yes, sweepers.
Oh,
so
okay,
throughout the
okay.
ship, like
Fore
if
and
you-
aft. I don't know. I can't remember
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah.
So I was walking. I mean, if you're a SEAL on board a Navy ship, you don't have any job. You don't sweep anything. You just stand around, work out. Anyway, I was walking through a passageway, and I saw a young sailor who was sitting, legs crossed underneath a ladder well. He had a foxtail in his hand. He was fully asleep. Fully 100% asleep. He heard footsteps, and he just woke up and he just started sweeping, so he wouldn't get in trouble.
So
Awesome.
take this thing 360 back on the rails.
Yeah, back on the rails.
LM bar.
Well, yeah, and talking about sort of the 1 foot in the water verse, like I think because we saw in the war on drugs too, is that when there's money going into something, everybody wants
to
a
it.
part of it,
Yeah.
and you get mission creep because everybody says we can do that.
I don't think it had as much to do with money, or at least I don't think NSW's motivation was money. I think NSW's motivation is there's a war going on,
Right.
and we're not going to miss this.
Right.
Which makes sense. I mean,
Which is always, I don't want to keep edging back toward the book. Right, I do, but that's always the bias or the.
It's a bias
Like the
towards
lens-
action. I mean, you have elite
Yeah.
commandos. Of course, they want to get into a
Right.
war.
right.
Yeah.
But there's something else that I didn't anticipate, and that's this. It's the impulse from the branch of service that the SEAL teams are attached to, which is the U.S. Navy. They also want to get into the war, and they use the SEAL teams as this sort of harpoon that they launch out, and then they grab that rope and they pull themselves in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when between the SEALs and the fighter pilots, like those are their big recruiting tools. Also, I mean, the Navy.
Yeah,
Tom Cruise and Charlie Sheen, man.
Yep.
I've never met a Tom Cruise in the Navy, but I've met lots of Charlie Sheens.
Yeah.
Tiger blood and all that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, walk us through a little bit more of. I'd like to hear about some of the operations that you were doing in Ambar, and what that was like. You're still a relatively young sailor. This is your first experience seeing real combat. If you can walk us through sort of like what the mission was, jocking up for those missions, and starting to go outside the wire.
So that deployment we were following the SEAL Team 3, the sort of the task unit bruiser era. So we were coming right on the heels of that, right at the sort of the beginning of the surge. So it was a mix of counterinsurgency type FID, and then straight direct action, Vietnam type SEAL stuff, taking boats up the Euphrates, inserting, offsetting, patrolling to someplace and either doing a hit or laying up someplace and waiting to see if anybody was going to come out. So on one of the last missions, we did a really great job of getting in to this town. It was sort of like a suburb of Ramadi. It was along the Euphrates. It was, but it was this little town of Abu Bali, and it was we'd inserted, we'd taken two separate houses on either sides of a little lake, and we were, positioned to sort of cover the flank of a Marine patrol that was going to be coming up. And at one point, right a little bit after sunset, we had the Marines got contacted. One of the Marines almost got shot. I mean, he took a bullet through the crotch of his pants, and they weren't going to get up after that. So they asked for our support. So one of our units on the southern side of the lake, I was in the northern spot. He gathered a little team together to go hunt a sniper in broad daylight, which isn't particularly comfortable. But right before they left the house, there was this little Iraqi or insurgent sniper team comes bebopping out of an alleyway in tracksuits and masks and RPGs and everything like that, and they took care of the problem pretty quickly. But as that was happening, I don't know what happened, but there was another element that saw our position on the north and contacted us pretty good and pinned us down. Like there was not a lot that we could do. One of our guys, SEAL Mark Robbins, he was on the top floor of this little structure that we were in. He popped up. I think he engaged one fighter, killed him, and then was about to engage this machine gunner who was pinning us down. And right before he engaged him, he saw this guy with an RPG, so he shifted his attention. The machine gunner, he killed the guy with the RPG, but the other guy shot him through the eye.
Oh, man.
That went through the head, went through the right eye, out the back of the head. So we spent the rest of that engagement just trying to save him. Mm-hmm. And then it was touch and go there for a second. The other team from the south side of the lake, they risked everything. They came around that lake. They fought through house after house, getting to our position. Took up a little flanking position on that unit. But there was this other guy, this Marine, who was he was the TOC commander. I mean, he was the commander of the FOB down there. But his Marines were out. But he was at the TOC, so he gathered together this little group of Marines. Took two Humvees up this road that we had never known to not be IED'd.
Right.
Braved this kind of mad dash to get to our position. Put his Humvees between the insurgents and a field, so we could call in a medevac for Mark, which was incredible. It was incredible, to see another. He wasn't a SEAL or anything like that, and you see this guy risk everything for some junior SEAL that he'd never met.
Throw a posse together and just
throw
roll
a
right
posse
out.
together.
Yeah.
And the posse that he gathered together. I mean, the funniest story that I have from that was that this guy, he at one point he was trying to, I was trying to get a smoke out there myself, but he was trying to get a smoke out to signal the medevac helicopter. So he's yelling up to his gunner. He's like, "I need a smoke! I need a smoke!" And this 18-year-old kid, he hands him a pack of cigarettes. God damn it!
I feel like every squad's got one.
Yeah. It was probably me back in the day.
That was probably me too. But Mark, he lived, and he managed to, despite having his eye, not missing an eye, and having a Gatorade cap-sized hole in the back of his head, he walked to the helicopter.
Wow.
Jesus.
He knew that he was going to be taking another gun out of the fight if he, let them carry him. So he literally muscled his way to the helicopter.
That's insane.
That's amazing.
The guy took a machine gun round through
PKM round right to the.
Wow.
the 7.62
Yeah.
by 54 round through the eyeball.
That's incredible.
Yeah, he's a tough kid. Or he's not a kid anymore, but he's an incredible person.
Did you because
Can you hear me okay? I'm on this thing? Okay.
Because this is something new for SEALs in terms of, it was new for everybody, but in terms of tactics, This wasn't like a small unit operation like in Vietnam where you could silently kind of get in and get out of places. Like in a lot of these built up areas, you needed to have a blocking force, you needed to have security, you needed to have a quick reaction force. Did you see your tactics changing over time?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, like, in an environment like that, we were trying to be as helpful as we could. I mean, it was different. The capture kill cycle that SEALs are always trying to get to. You go, you grab a guy, you ransack him for information, and then you go to grab the next guy. Or that was available to us to some degree, and we had a pretty robust intel infrastructure to do that. But at the same time, you want to, just like that Marine major who cobbled together that little force of guys to come get us. You want to be helpful to other Americans that are risking everything every day.
Right.
And in that instance, if Marines are going to be out there patrolling, through what we knew was a really sporty area,
Right.
we're going to help.
Right, and that's where you guys were at that point in time.
I think that's where everybody was at. Like, I mean, I know Task Unit Bruiser was doing the same thing. I know that the Habanilla Task Unit that preceded us was doing the same thing. And I think it took a second for everybody's sort of fighting the last war.
Right.
Everybody does it.
Right.
And the last war for the SEAL teams was really Vietnam.
Right.
So we were always you're always expecting the same thing to repeat itself, and it just wasn't doing it at that point. So it took a second for NSW to get it sort of on step, and once it did, you find if it seemed like NSW, by making those changes tactically, all these other new opportunities were appearing for us too.
Well, I feel because you mentioned fighting the last war or fighting the way we think, because CQB became, sort of the de facto way of waging war for special operations.
That's the culmination, right?
Yeah,
you're always expecting to get to there,
right?
Like the big mission.
And then I think that after a while, people realized that there was no reason to do CQB. Like there was no hostage. There was no reason to go into these buildings where the insurgents knew the tactics. They had barricaded or set up or whatever, rigged it. And so then, there was a slow shift to call outs and things like that. So when you say that we all, everybody fights the last war, not only do we fight the last war, but we also fight I don't want to say to what is sexy, but CQB was it was
the cool thing.
It was the thing, right? But really, this was back to World War II style, house to house.
Did you find that the Army was doing? So your career precedes 9/11. Did you find that the Army was doing, or Rangers, Green Berets, or are they doing all of that CQB?
Yeah. So when I was in the Ranger Battalion, they were transitioning from sort of the preeminent light infantry force in airfield seizures and patrol bases and all that. They were still doing all that, but then they were also doing CQB and implementing CQB, and all that was, of course, coming down from the higher tier. And then they kind of switched over, and that became how everybody, even I think conventional infantry units, that became how people conducted war until they realized there's no hostage in this building. We don't need to rush in. We don't need to dominate four corners. We can pie these windows off. We can pie these doorways off, and we can throw in a grenade if we don't like what we see.
Yeah.
By the time I got there in 2002, I felt like we were transitioning from lessons learned in Mogadishu to this new form of warfare, and the JSOC guys definitely helped modernize what Ranger Battalion was doing.
Yeah.
As far as CQB is concerned. But another thing on that too, and that I wanted to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Navy SEALs start changing the way they were deployed? Wasn't it at first they came to double up the platoon strength on deployments?
They did. And that happened on that first deployment that I was on.
Ah, okay.
So we went from platoon-sized deployments, and
A SEAL platoon is how many dudes?
Well, at the time it was about 16.
Okay.
I think now it's more. It's more toward 20, a little bit north of 20. But yeah, at the time it was about 16. So more than an A team.
And that was because they were previously task organized for maritime.
Well, the expectation is that they're just like Vietnam. They're going to, each platoon is going to split into squads, and that each squad needs to be, sort of self-sufficient, to a degree. But yeah, I mean the problems that changed and
Right.
but they were changing NSW. I mean they were we went from a sort of a deploy for geographic specialty to a deploy for well, we're going to take everything. Each team is going to cover its part of the globe. I'm not sure if that helped or hindered NSW. I don't know, and I'm not sure where we are right now and how that's. But yeah, they were messing with the mixture, right before 9/11 kicked off. That whatever they were trying to do, everything got sort of firmed up.
Any other particularly hairy operations you'd call from Anbar on that deployment?
That was the hairiest.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
The trying to think of the very funny ones. We did get contacted once on a when we were inserting. We were intending to insert on an assault. I was always a radio or RTO, so I always had a man-pack radio. This is the first time that I wasn't going to have a man-pack. I was going to be the lightest I'd ever been, and I was pretty excited about it. I didn't have a 203. I had my short barrel on. I was right before we got off the boat. Somebody handed me a 1,000-yard reel of det cord in a trash bag.
In a trash bag?
Yeah, they whispered to me. He's like, "Carry this for me." I was like, "Mother."
Why 1,000 yards?
I don't remember
And why
I don't remember the
trash bag?
details of the mission. I know that they didn't have to do it because we got contacted. We got ambushed on the river. There were 4 insurgents that popped up over a berm with AK-47s, and we were on those SOC-Rs. I think we dumped 10,000 rounds in 45 seconds at those guys. We killed one. One dropped dead from a heart attack. I mean, 10,000 rounds coming over a berm at you, you'd drop dead from a heart attack.
Horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
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 That's pretty, that was funny.
And after that, rotating back home, what was the next step for you in your naval career?
Next step for me was I went to grad school, and then I helped refine some of our JTAC equipment doctrine, and I got out.
So the Navy gave you time off in the middle of a war to go to grad school?
Well, they didn't give me time off, but I was taking it catch as catch can.
Okay.
There were a couple classes I would cancel. It was kind of a mess with GI Bill and everything like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty ballsy of you, quite frankly, to go to grad school while also being full-time active duty SEAL.
Yeah, I look back on it, and
It's a lot.
I don't know why I did that. And I don't know why I did this. But there was something that got sort of unlocked, on that first deployment to Europe. I'd always been a reader, but I'd never been a disciplined reader, and hadn't really wanted to know, I wanted to know everything. And then once I got back from that deployment, I really kind of set out on this, plan. I always had a book. I always was.
What was your plan at that point?
I didn't know. I mean, I had considered being an academic. I had applied to a couple of programs, and when you apply to PhD programs for anything, you've got to have some sense of what direction you're going to go.
Yeah.
And I had been reading, and I'd been somewhat interested in Napoleonic War type stuff. Kind of the Napoleon, that 1815 or the 1800 to 1918 period in Europe. So I was kind of looking at that. I didn't know where I could find either Napoleonic Wars, First World War. I liked that, but I was kind of angling toward a career in academia.
Mm-hmm.
I had shit grades though from college, and a diploma from BUD/S will get you so far, and it's not going to get you into a PhD program at any reputable university, though. So,
Was that tough for you to get out after achieving like your, literally your childhood dream to be a SEAL?
it was, and you regret it every day. But I had a son at that point,
Okay,
and
yeah.
you guys have kids. Once you see that little guy,
that's like, to me, a very courageous move, because one of the things we've talked about on the show before is how when you're doing this, when you're doing this job, when you're doing what you dreamed of doing, how it can become a very selfish endeavor, and the people in your life suffer for it, and it's very courageous, I think, and very like.
yeah. I mean, I go back and forth on it. I mean, it's a decision I've second guessed. I'll probably second guess it till the day I die.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the SEAL teams. I mean, I wrote this, this is my love letter to the SEAL teams.
Yeah.
But I love those guys more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when all is said and done, when you're 50 and 60 and broken down, the SEAL teams are only going to love you back so much.
Yeah.
But,
Well, yeah.
but family, hopefully is, hopefully you get along
Feeding
with
you
it.
applesauce.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you're drooling on yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Pushing you around in your wheelchair. Because the VA hasn't taken care of you.
Tell you
So-
damn kids about the war in Iraq. What do you know?
So when did the idea, or when did you start thinking about this book?
But after that deployment, I got back. That's true to a degree. I'd always known, like I said before, that I was going to at some point write a history book. I didn't know if that was going to be as an academic. I didn't know how, but I didn't start thinking about this book until I got back from that deployment. I got back from that deployment, and I went to see my grandparents, the grandfather I was really close to, my grandma. We had very close. She, I was over there to eat, and at one point she asked me, what the hell were you doing in Iraq? You're a sailor. Like, I was like, I was, probably 3 weeks away from, that firefight that I'd been in, 2 weeks away from going to the hospital and being the liaison at Bethesda with Mark's family. And for some reason, I kind of answered that question a little bit rudely. Like I said, I'm not a sailor, Grandma, I'm a Navy SEAL. For some reason, I don't know if it was because I answered that way, to someone who clearly loved me and was just curious about, what I was doing there, or if it was just a really good question. But I know, she had context. She was not a completely uneducated person. She lived through World War II. She was the oldest of 8, and she had 7 brothers. All 7 of them had served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and she knew that sailors, they fought on ships. They fought. They were at sea. They did not go ashore, and here I was returning from a war that she had seen on the news that would look like a desert, or towns in a desert, and she didn't understand it, and I didn't understand it either, and the question just kind of stuck in my head, and stuck there for like 4 years until I really I got out in 2010, and it was a year later, one SEAL teams, killed Osama bin Laden. 3 months, 4 days after that, the Extortion 17 tragedy happens, and it seemed like a remarkable, occurrence. Both of both of these things happening this close together, both of these things happening, one in Pakistan, one in Afghanistan, both events occurring more than, 600 miles away from the closest salt water. It's like, I need to know the answer to this. Why are we there? How has the Navy justified this, or how has a naval unit justified this?
This book was partially you trying to process your own experiences. In the
Absolutely,
Navy.
it is.
Yeah.
And when I started, thinking about history and started thinking about writing books, I was always sort of critical of people that were that wrote history just about things that had affected them. Like I was critical, or I wasn't critical. That's not the right word. But I would always like, black historians that were only interested in slavery, or Jewish historians that were only interested in the Holocaust. But we all come to history that way. Like we all want to know about ourselves, and this was me trying to understand, this monumentally important experience for me. Just like them writing those books, about those things that are monumentally important for them. They're trying to understand family history, and I came to history first, and we all come to history first by stories that our grandparents and our parents tell us, the times that they lived in, the major events that they've experienced. Anyway, that was.
But Jack, can you hold the book up real quick?
Yeah.
I posted it before. I'll post it again. The link to the book and for Amazon, wherever you buy your books. I'm just convenient
It's in
link,
the description also.
and it's also in the description. Available on Kindle. Is it out on an audiobook? It is. Yes.
Yeah, audio, Kindle. It's not paperback. The
Hardcover right now.
hardcover, the publishers decided to push it a year before they paperback it, so which is great. It's on
Yeah.
the third printing right now.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good. By Water Beneath the Walls. I got like 50 pages left in the book, full disclosure, but it's really good, really well written, and unexpectedly controversial in a few places. Some choice words for William Darby. Wild Bill Donovan takes a tongue lashing from you in this book. Even the first SEAL, who's it, Roy Baum,
Baum, yeah.
you tear his book up.
Yeah.
There's even a racial tirade against the Irish in here that we're all criminals and cops. I couldn't believe
Wait, you're all what?
criminals or police officers.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
The Twin Forks of East
Yeah.
Coast Irish destiny.
That sounds about right. And I know you're not a police officer, Jack.
I'm the guy who, we're in Brooklyn, so I'm the guy when I show up at the party, everyone looks at me like, that's the Fed right there. That's but no, I appreciate that it is a kind of a critical look at U.S. military history. It's not just about the naval commando or maritime commando mission.
It's not, no.
There's a lot in here about the Rangers, about special forces, about CIA to some extent.
Yeah.
Force Recon gets a little bit of attention. Charlie Beckwith gets a little bit of attention in Project Delta. So, I mean, why don't you tell us, Ben, because this is not an attempt to be an all-encompassing U.S. Special Operations history.
Nope.
What is it that you were trying to accomplish with this book?
So one, I didn't want to write a comprehensive history of naval special warfare. That seemed boring to me. Partly because I think other people had tried it, and I didn't see anybody that had succeeded. Or Kelly had tried, Kevin Dockery had tried, Barry Dwyer had tried, Bill Doyle tried. I think some of the reason that these books weren't interesting, or they weren't successful, or they weren't compelling, captivating, whatever you want to say, is because you're taking on 80 years of history, and you're trying to tell this in 300 pages. How are you going to decide what's important, in that 80 years, except what's interesting to you? I knew that this book would need something to pull you through it. I knew, and I never wanted to write a book with sort of a thesis or like an argument to try to make, but I needed something that was going to take a reader from the beginning and just drag you through to the end. So I needed a question that needed to be solved, and that question that I settled on was how did the U.S. Navy, the least likely branch of service, come to create the country's first permanent land-focused commando unit? It's a completely unlikely history. So it's not really, like I said, it's not a comprehensive history. It's more like I almost like to call it a biography of NSW, or at least an early biography of NSW. Like it's like you read, Hamilton, or even Montefiore's book on Jerusalem. It's not. You take that central character, and you use that central character as a vehicle to introduce you to all these other little stories that you know are sort of surrounding that thing. So it's not. It's a. And that's what it is. It's a book that it never tries to describe everything that happened to the SEAL teams. It really is just trying to describe why the Navy created this unit, this commando unit, first. So if you're going to tell that story, you have to tell why all of these other institutions, the Army, the Marine Corps, the OSS, the CIA, why they didn't do it first. That's why each chapter is kind of alternates. The book's about 50-50 Navy, Army, Marine Corps, CIA. So I alternate. So, you know, this is probably the only book that's ever going to be written about the SEAL teams that starts with a chapter on the Marine Corps. And then NSW, then Army, then NSW again, then it just kind of bounces back and forth.
When you started the book with that question in your mind from your grandmother, was that your intent, or did sort of your idea for the book change over time as you were writing it?
It did. It changed. It went from being so that, you know, the question that my grandmother asked was just, you know, what the hell is a sailor doing in the middle of Iraq? It went from that to how did the U.S. Navy come to create the country's first? So it did. It modified over time, and part of it modified, you know, for selfish reasons. Like I didn't want to tell that history. I didn't want to tell just the SEAL team history. I wanted to find all these other stories about. I selfishly wanted to know them. You know, I wanted to know about the Rangers. Wanted to know about the Green Berets. I wanted to know about Marine Force Recon and the OSS. I was looking for some sort of vehicle that would let me do that. This question seemed to let me do that. So that it kind of shifted as I was, you know, you're a writer. You've confronted, you know, this, you know, the cursor on the page, and it's miserable. It's you know, and it just, I was able to find it eventually, but yeah, it took a lot of hard work, you know, writing that first chapter to kind of massage this question or this thesis into something that would allow me to do all these other things.
In the book, you make reference to like naval infantrymen and Navy SEAL Rangers. And I'm like, oh.
It hurts. I mean, I know it hurts.
What's happening?
But doesn't it hurt you when you read about your institution, the U.S. Army, constantly ripping the rug out from under, you know?
Yeah. And there's a truth to what you're writing, though, that the Navy is continuously trying to get in on the action. But there's also a capability that's a legitimate that needs to be built. Whether you're talking about the explosives demolition guys in World War II at D-Day, or even the guys who spend quite a bit of time talking about how the Navy starts venturing further and further inland.
Yeah.
Why don't we take it from the top then? I mean, you really start the book talking about World War II.
Right.
Where does this book start off? What's your jumping off point?
My jumping off point's the Marine Corps raiders and the raid on Macon Island. Mm-hmm. And the reason I start there is because that is both chronologically, it's the first, you know, modern commando experiment that the U.S. military, you know, undertakes. 2, it's a commando experiment that the Marine Corps had no interest in, and they only did it because their parent service, the U.S. Navy, wanted them to. So it's got dual relevancy. You know, it's this. You know, it's first. It sets a standard or an example. It's the first. It's the first one that the American people know about. Within a year or within 14 months, I think, of the raid, there's a movie about it. So every American knows that, you know, there are American commandos. And 2, it telegraphs this, you know, the Navy's interest in creating something like this. Mm. So it seems relevant to me that, you know, for the institution that ultimately created the first permanent commando unit in the U.S. military, it seems interesting that, you know, 20 years before that, they were already, you know, telegraphing that they wanted to do this.
And it makes a lot of sense, I guess, in my mind, and probably in a lot of people's minds, that This is the capability that would be the purview of the Marine Corps, right?
Right.
That the Marines go out with the Navy, they're on the ships, and they provide that capability of making, I mean, it's the,
Force projection.
well, and their term amphibious, right?
Right,
They're
right,
going from,
right.
from the sea to the land, right?
Right.
Why did the Navy seize on this capability? As you were going through your research and writing this book, why is the Navy so hard on this particular subject?
Well, the Navy has always had, every Navy, not every Navy, but every expeditionary Navy, the Royal Navy, the American Navy, and those, they have always developed a Marine Corps, a semi-maritime force, or a semi-maritime army to project, force from the sea. But at the beginning of World War II, and you have to sort of go back to World War I. So in World War I, and this is one of the things that gets cut. They got the editor really he cut it out of the book, and it's incredibly painful to pull it out. But I wrote this this section of the book about how the Marines had done incredible work in World War I, in the trenches of World War I, and then they fought out of the trenches, and they had they'd done this because the Army. At least in the beginning, hadn't done very well. The Marine Corps, at the beginning of the First World War, is the most competent land warfare force that the U.S. military has. They demonstrate an ability to be much more than just the Navy's sort of utility force. So, after World War I, that's what the Marine Corps starts to see itself as. They don't see themselves any longer as this, stepchild of the U.S. Navy. They start to see themselves as, why can't we be just like the Army? Mm-hmm. Why can't we be a maritime version of them? Mm-hmm. And all of their leaders, want the same thing, or at least they have this ambition to, modify the force, to grow the force, and that's what they do. And when this opportunity to create commandos comes along, that's the old Marine Corps. We want the new Marine Corps. We want the Marine Corps that can seize an entire island, not just raid an island. We want a Marine Corps that can conquer an island. So it's all about, I don't, I never talk about anybody, I don't want to convey that any of these leaders failures, but they just have different priorities. Holcomb is not a failure because he doesn't see the opportunity of Marine Corps raiders. He sees an opportunity for a Marine Corps that is the Marine Corps we know today. Mm-hmm. But there are consequences to, having those preoccupations.
Right. And we've seen this with the Marine Corps all the way up until like recent history where the Marine Corps was an elite force. So the Marine Corps was not going to have elite forces within the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And, like they missed out on the JSOC budget. They missed out because they still maintained that, right? That sort of mentality. The whole Marine Corps is an elite force. We don't need a specialized unit within ourselves.
That's this undercurrent. And at some point, that undercurrent or that bias or whatever you want to call it, that is consequential. Yeah. That comes into play. That helps to disband the Raiders. It helps to disband the Rangers later. Helps to disband the Rangers again. But yeah, this idea that we don't need an elite force. We're all elite already.
Right.
And they have a point. Particularly as these wars or conflicts continue, the Marine Corps Raiders, they were the best that the Marine Corps had, in August of 1942. Uh-huh. They weren't the best that the Marine Corps had after Tarawa, a year later. The best the Marine Corps had were those guys that survived that, and they really knew what combat was, or the guys that went through the Guadalcanal campaign. Like, they had a point.
Yeah, your book talks a lot of things I didn't know about the politics, and it gets into quite a bit about the personalities, and in some sense, I think you can see why the U.S. military is as good as it is because of inter-service rivalry. And people are competing, and I want to be the best at this mission. I want to be better than you, which creates a better force in the long term. But on other times, the competition becomes quite petty, and we start duplicating capabilities, and all sorts of stupid stuff starts happening.
Yeah, if we wiped the slate clear and decided that we were going to build a military from scratch on this board right here, we would not build the military that we have.
Right. We would probably not have fighter jets spread across 3 different services.
No.
And,
We have 2 separate navies. We have 2 separate armies. We have 3 separate air forces. I mean, and now we have.
special ops is like its own thing.
Special ops is its own thing. We would
Yeah.
have one. We'd have. But you're right. There is an advantage, I think, and it's a hidden advantage, and it's not. It's not immediately obvious. But the military it's a bit like a market in that way.
And these egotistical personalities that are trying to carve out their little empire.
Yeah, and there are these the entrepreneurs. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not entrepreneurs aren't just confined to the world of business. There's half the guys not half the guys, almost all the guys that I write about are entrepreneurs. They're just entrepreneurs within a military context.
Right. Well, and I mean, they're big personalities, right? Back with
They are.
Marchenko, like they're big personalities to sort of carve out that.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, arguably,
Fight.
those capabilities wouldn't be created if not for a guy who's a quote-unquote hardhead or hothead or
Hard charger,
whatever you want to pejorative term you want to apply.
An entrepreneur.
I mean, Buck Halpern, he's one of the guys that I write about initially. He's the Jewish Notre Dame quarterback. He's an NFL quarterback, and then he fights through all of World War II. He goes from being a scout boat driver or a landing craft driver all the way to being a ground force commander of Navy-led Chinese guerrillas in China. Like his career spans this whole thing, and then after the war, he goes back to Chicago. He runs his father's light company, and he starts business after business. He started LL Bean.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some of these guys are, and Phil Bucklew, who I write about. He, on the day that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he was recruiting guys for a new football team, an NFL football team that he was starting in Columbus. Like, these guys were
Go-getters.
Yeah, they're go-getters, but they've got this, they see gaps. Mm-hmm. Just like, every entrepreneur does. They see a gap, and they're trying to fill that gap. I don't know if you ever, contracted. When I contracted, the one thing that I noticed about all the guys that I worked with was they all had schemes on the side. I'm sure you
mean like they had like some sort of like multi-level marketing scheme, and
something like that.
They have the Western Union receipts that they're sending to their Filipino
or a
wife.
training company.
Yeah.
They're starting, a kit company,
Yeah.
gear. They're,
something. They're all working on something. Bob Wagner, who I write about later in the book, he comes up with the PRUs, the PRUs. The CIA
Provincial reconnaissance
the
unit.
provincial reconnaissance units that sort of teach that cycle of capture kill operations to the rest of the military. Mm-hmm. He develops this thing. He doesn't, as best as I could tell, I don't think the guy ever slept. But he's developing this thing while running 2 separate bars in Vietnam that he bought, ran, and some of these guys were just insatiable entrepreneurs.
I'd like to hear you talk about the Navy demolition teams that hit Omaha Beach and other places, other areas on D-Day. I thought that was just an incredible holy shit story in your book.
It is, yeah. That chapter was a real challenge in the sense that you could have written a chapter on each of the Gap assault teams.
Yeah.
3 Gap assault teams are, so for the listeners or the viewers, there are 21 separate Gap assault teams that were assigned to a different section of Omaha Beach. Their mission was to blow 16 gaps on Omaha Beach that tanks could land on and then push into the hinterland. The Army, this would normally have been an Army mission. It would have been an Army engineering mission, except for the fact that the Navy had somehow managed to convince the Army that the Navy was in charge of every invasion until the Army was firmly established ashore. And
It ended up being both, right? Because they needed everybody they could get.
it did. So it became the Gap assault teams become a joint unit, and that was one of the interesting things I found in the book is that naval special warfare doesn't necessarily, they're not always pushing themselves ashore. It's just they kind of like hitch themselves to the next wagon that's going, that's going that direction. So the scouts and raiders, they attach to the Army. They attach themselves to the Army engineers, so the Gap assault teams. They later attach themselves to the Marine Corps when they're doing railroad raids in Korea.
Weren't there even a couple stories where they did their naval demolition mission and then just like kind of jumped into the stack with the Marines? Or
They did.
lobbing hand grenades and stuff.
They did. The sailors, they jump in, the UDTs 1 and 2. The invasion of Kwajalein and Roy Namur, they follow the Marine Corps inland, and they fought inland combat before. Anyway, but to get back to the combat demolition units, it absolutely was a joint unit. Army, Navy, blow these obstacles, blow these gaps so the Army can push ashore. And they suffer some of the most devastating casualty numbers on D-Day. So devastating that the naval combat demolition units at Omaha Beach are awarded one of just 3 presidential unit citations that are given out to Navy units for that action. But I think 31 are killed. I think some 60 are wounded. It's a 51 or 52% casualty rates. I mean, it's 5 times higher than the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava.
Yeah.
It sounded just so horrific, and I mean, it will jump in whenever I'm saying something that's historically inaccurate. But these guys jump in, they get in there, and there are all of these maritime obstacles, metal obstacles and so on, and mined obstacles that are out in the surf there, and these guys have to go out there under MG-42 fire and start planting explosives on them to destroy those obstacles so the landing craft can get into the beach.
Correct.
And meanwhile, they're just getting chewed up.
They are, and what I didn't realize is how kind of non-linear the invasion happened on Omaha.
Yeah.
And the intention was that the tanks land first, the Gap assault teams land second, the waves of infantrymen land third. It's not really how it happens. Some sections, Fox Green, Dog Green, Easy Red, different things are happening at different sections of the beach. So on one section, the section that Bill Freeman lands, he's the first landing craft to touch down on Omaha Beach. To his right, he can see Point de Hawk, where the Rangers are 45 minutes late. He knows that he's supposed to see Rangers up there. There are no Rangers. He lands. There's no machine gun fire. He doesn't know what to do. So he just runs ashore and starts planting bombs on obstacles. That doesn't happen, everywhere else. Like I said, three landing craft, 3 Gap assault teams are completely destroyed before they get out of their landing craft. 2 by mortars, 1 by just completely by machine gun fire. It's still the most significant contribution that naval special warfare has given to the country. It's the most important day, the most important mission, the highest number of casualties.
Yeah.
And what's interesting though about the naval the NCDUs that fought there is they'd all gone through Hell Week.
Oh,
They're
really?
the first group that has gone through Hell Week. Hell Week was invented by Draper Kaufman. It was this Draper Kaufman. If you, I don't know how to describe him quickly. He's the weirdest guy that I write about in the book. I mean, he's a weird guy. Like he's
Like what is a weird fact about him, or one or two weird facts?
He got kicked out of the He didn't get kicked out of the Naval Academy. He got dropped from the Naval Academy because he has bad eyesight. His eyesight is so bad that they even when the war starts, they don't want to let him back in. But he has this weird biography where World War II starting, he volunteers for the French army. He serves as an ambulance driver. He fights through the German invasion of France. Then he becomes a POW. He gets released. The condition that he'll never take arms against the Third Reich again. He immediately volunteers for the British Navy. He fights through the Blitz as a bomb disposal guy. Then he gets repatriated to the United States Navy. He gets put in charge of this bomb, not before he dismantles a bomb at Pearl Harbor and wins the Navy Cross, but then he gets put in charge of this bomb disposal unit to come up with a way, to defeat these obstacles on Hitler's Atlantic Wall. And he, being the one person in the U.S. military at that point who's seen the most of World War II, he knows how horrible combat is. So he comes up with this training curriculum that is equally horrible. And he goes to the Scout and Raider program. They have this 8-week-long, conditioning course that they've developed, all developed by former NFL athletes. It's supposed to be pretty, tough. It's 8 weeks long. It's 8 weeks long. He knows that he only has, a very short time, to train his guys. So he's like, can you take this 8-week-long course and compress it into 5 days? I guess. So they do. And that's how Hell Week comes. Hell Week is just this Scouts and Raiders, 8-week-long curriculum smashed into 5, sleepless days. And then not only does he create that, but he puts himself through the course. So
Even though he was kind of like an older guy and like not in particularly good shape at that
bad
point.
shape. He can't see. He can't even qualify for the 2020 vision standard that he sets for the rest of his guys. Yeah, he's a weirdo. and then after that, he fights through. He volunteers for the UDTs in the Pacific, and he leads, the UDTs through, some of the most, consequential battles of the war.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about the stuff that they did in the Pacific also? Because some of those stories were just like batshit crazy when they're coming up on the surf and they're kind of like taking depth measurements while they're getting shot at and stuff.
Yeah, that was the one that so that was my that was my 5th chapter. I started researching that chapter before I started researching any other chapter. And I was still researching that chapter 10 years later when I finished the book. I was one of those chapters that I was like, this is a hard chapter to compress because Kelsey Kaufman, Draper Kaufman's daughter, I can't even remember how I found her, but she could not have been kinder, could not have been nicer. She invited me to her home. She gave me complete access to, her dad's, file cabinet full of papers. He kept everything.
So this book has information in it that has never been published before.
No, never.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like primary source material.
Yeah, it's, I'm going to take a break to cry, but yeah. Yeah,
No,
it took a lot.
It's amazing. I mean, it really.
Yeah, and
But-
it's humbling.
like I was saying, like I like to think like I'm somewhat well read. Like there's stuff in this book I never knew. Even the stuff about like Bill Donovan and things I had just never read about before anywhere. It was really amazing. So I'm sorry. Continue, please.
No, so it was probably the first chapter I started researching. There were 2 chapters that I was, kind of neck and neck at the end that I was still working on finishing writing, but chapter 5, the UDT chapter, was one of them. And the problem with that was there was just so much information. The reason that the UDTs are important to the history of the SEAL teams is, one, they were pulled from the UDT. The SEAL teams were pulled from the UDTs. But 2, the underwater demolition teams, the UDTs, are the only special operations unit that survived World War II. They're the only unit that does not get disbanded. The Raiders are disbanded, the VAC Recon is disbanded, the Devils Brigaders are disbanded, the Rangers are disbanded, OSS is disbanded, everything. They're all gone. So the Navy, takes all of the, that institutional knowledge that they've managed to accrue during that, 4 years of terror, and they compress it into these 2 underwater demolition teams that survived the war. And so even though the underwater demolition teams don't do any commando operations during the war, they're the only guys standing at the end of it. So they start to think, hey, maybe we're commandos. But yeah, so the operations that they go on are they're absolute. I mean, so when we were talking offline, there are certain characters in the book that have stuck with readers, but there's certain units that have also stuck with readers, and the one that I get the most questions about are the UDTs, which I thought was just sort of common knowledge. It's not. Like the fact that there were these guys that in nothing more than dive masks, swim trunks, and dive fins,
And a K-bar.
and a K-bar, and a slate to mark depths on. They swam in completely naked almost up to these beaches to record findings. I think for whatever reason it's stuck with people, and for good reason. I mean the risks that those guys ran. I mean,
There's stuff. I mean, there's so much in this book. Some of it, like you only like almost allude to with a couple sentences, is probably stuff that you had to omit for length. Like dudes coming across the shore and derailing a 16-car Japanese train, and I'm like, what the fuck? I never even heard about this shit before. Like, how this happened?
yeah. Yeah, for brevity, like you find yourself like, I mean, for the UDT chapter, I probably left 30 pages on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Like
The one where there's like a UDT below like a Japanese pillbox, and the machine gun's coming out, and the guy's like lobbing a hand grenade up there, and like, what the hell?
Out of curiosity, because like the CBs were really active, like from World War II and on.
right.
Were the UDTs originally? Were they sort of part of that construction battalion? And then how did they?
They
how
are.
Did they
Well,
create their own personality?
Sort of. So the unit that my grandfather was in, he was he had a picture of his the unit that he volunteered for. So when he volunteered for the underwater demolition teams, they called them the 11th Special CBs. But there was a connection between the CBs and the underwater demolition teams. So about 40% of recruits for the UDTs. Initially, the UDTs are a joint unit, Army Marine Corps UDTs. After the first 2 UDTs, they get rid of the Army and the Marine Corps volunteers, and they make it an all-Navy outfit. In part, they make it an all-Navy outfit because the Navy, or the commander in the Pacific, he doesn't want anybody to have any sort of authority over this unit. He wants this to be a completely Navy unit. He's tired of dealing with the Marines. He doesn't want them to be able to take anything away from him, so he makes it an all-Navy unit. But what was the question again?
About the CBs. How?
Oh yeah, so the CBs.
How the UDTs
Right.
managed to peel off?
So the Navy at that point, with no other, service branches to contribute, to this unit, they need every swimmer in the fleet that they can get. And the Seabees, they have a pretty robust training camp at Camp Perry. So about 40% of the recruits to the UDTs come from the Seabees. Another 40% come from the Fort Pierce NCDUs, and the remainder just come from wherever they can get them in the Pacific Fleet. Anybody that can swim. So they put them through a little pressure cooker of training in Maui.
But the UDTs were never like part, because I thought that the UDTs originally started out as part of the CBs, as part of the construction.
No, the UDTs are created out of whole cloth.
Okay.
But they do recruit a significant number
Okay.
of their swimmers from the Seabees.
From the CBs. All right, that's fascinating. And why were all these other units, the Raiders, the OSS, everybody that you talked about, why are they all disbanded after World War II and the UDTs remain?
That's a great question. And there's different reasons for all of them. And I probably could have. I don't know that my editor thinks this, and I'm not sure that the readers think this, but the book could have been twice as long.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it could have gone into the Devil's Brigaders. I mean, there were when I initially wrote chapter 3, which is my chapter about Darby's Rangers, I didn't want to write about Darby's Rangers. I knew a little bit about Darby. I knew a little bit about Cisterna. I was just like, I don't want to touch it. I was more interested, selfishly, in the Merrill's Marauders in Burma. I really wanted to, write a chapter about Michkina, the battle for that Burma airfield. Yeah, that seemed really attractive to me. I did a ton of research. I found a lot of stuff, and the more I read, the more I realized this is not relevant to the story. I needed to cover. I needed to find after World War II, and the story that explained that was this raid on Cisterna. It was the most. It was the operation that convinced this entire generation of Army planners that Ranger operations, or rather commando operations, were. Well, they were risky, but two, they could be performed by anybody. We didn't have to separate, an entire group of people away from the rest of the Army, call them elite, and say that they could do special missions. But each unit is disbanded for various reasons. The Raiders are disbanded because the Marine Corps doesn't, they don't want Raiders. The Rangers are disbanded primarily because of Cisterna, because of this, this aftertaste, that, this whole horrible debacle. The 700
sending light infantry up against like a Panzer battalion or whatever is probably not the best decision.
It's a terrible decision. I mean, researching that chapter, writing that chapter, I had to. When I was doing my research at all the archives that I was doing it at, I was very disciplined to not look at what I was grabbing. I was really just, I would pull entire boxes out, I would pull folders out. I was like, okay, I need this. And I would take picture, and then I would move on. I would not read, the documents that I was reading. I would do that later. Mm-hmm. I would, once I got home, I would print all these documents off. I would go through them and I'd highlight it, make notes, and all the rest. That's when I did the actual reading, the processing of the material. I did not do that at the archive. If you did that at the archive, you were wasting time. The only time I violated my own rule at the archive was when I was at the National Archive in College Station, Maryland, or College Park, Maryland, and I was going through the transcript of Darby talking to the 1st Battalion radioman at Cisterna, and all those transmissions are recorded, and I found myself no different than the reader is in the book, turning page after page, and I found myself getting emotional. I had to stop and take a break, because that history is right there in front of you, and those guys are literally they're dying in front of you, and you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and you write about it in your book quite a bit about what was going on in the TOC. What were they running like a barn at the time, and the commander is like having breakdowns. Like everyone's having breakdowns at various points as like these battalions are just wiped out, and like there's like Rangers like charging tanks, like throwing hand grenades at them and like crazy shit like that. I mean, the amount of carnage that happened in that war is like, I just find it impossible to even conceptualize in my brain. Yeah,
the combat that I've seen is not combat, if that's combat. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that World War II generation, like, yeah, it's a different level. It's a different thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Very different.
I mean, even Omaha Beach, the way you describe it, and there's nothing like that.
It's a tornado. I mean, there's nothing like.
Yeah.
Could you tell us the story about Mary Miles? I found that chapter very interesting in the book. It's about a rearguard action that happened in China to sort of draw resources away from the Japanese military. I had never heard about this before. So I was learning about it for the first time, reading about it in your book, and I just thought this was like incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, so a little backstory. This is a chapter that I did not want to write. I knew that this experience had happened. I knew that the Navy had raised a guerrilla army in China, and they had led raids in China to sort of tie the Japanese down. At the time, I'd spent 3 years working on World War II, and I was really anxious to get into Korea. And my thought was I was going to write about sort of the Navy's guerrilla warfare experiences, and I was going to talk about China in a sort of prologue or an introductory section to it. And I wrote up a couple paragraphs, and I was like, well, that's an interesting fact. I'm going to put that in there. And I found myself, it was a page, a little long for an introduction. I was like, all right, 2 pages. I was like, when it got to 10 pages, I was like, mother, I knew I had to write. I had to double back on World War II. That chapter took a year to write, but it was so that the experience that you're talking about is the Navy creates a guerrilla army in China. So American planners at the beginning of World War II, they see China as this, huge opportunity to tie Japanese forces down. Japan's been in there since 1936, 37.
Something like that, like in Nanking. Yeah.
Yeah, so they've
Manchuria.
Yeah. There's a huge number of like something like 600,000 Japanese soldiers in mainland Japan.
Mainland China.
Mainland China, and they would like to raise a guerrilla army to see if they can tie them down and keep them from going into the Pacific. Bill Donovan wants to do this. Bill Donovan sees China as sort of the main theater of OSS operations. He sees this is an area where he can sort of be the ruler of this kingdom. The Navy sort of gets there first. They send this sort of unassuming destroyer skipper to China to sort of set up weather stations, and this unassuming destroyer skipper just happens to have a personality that is really well suited for the Chinese culture, and he ingratiates himself with the Chinese high command and manages to exceed OSS expectations or OSS hopes, and that's Mary Miles. He's our Lawrence of Arabia for World War II, but there's nothing flashy about him. He's a dad. Like, he's a dad that goes to China and raises 100,000 man army, and he's totally like unassuming,
and he gets ingratiates himself with what like the intelligence head,
Ty Lee,
yeah,
Ty Lee,
which is another like weird story about.
Ty Lee's a character,
yeah.
I think there's a movie there. I mean, you could definitely make a movie about the Navy in China or American, if it wasn't for Chinese domination of the film industry. I think you would. There's definitely a movie there.
Because they were who's it? Yat-sen was the Chinese Democrats.
Well, yeah, Sun Yat-sen, he precedes all of them, but Chiang Kai-shek, he's the nationalist head. He's the generalissimo, and Ty Lee is is almost his number two. Mm-hmm. He's his J. Edgar Hoover / Donovan rolled into one. I mean,
and Miles learns Chinese, and
so Miles Miles did a tour in China before, and Miles just
as an observer, right?
Sort of as an observer, sort of like that Sand Pebbles type Navy tour, and he's an interested guy. Like he never develops like sort of the supremacy that most Westerners develop when they go to an Asian country, or at that time particularly hostile personality. He I don't know how else to describe him. He's just got this. Mm-hmm. He loves the Chinese in a way that other Americans don't. Like he doesn't look down on them. He sees them as equals, and and I think that's why he manages to develop this relationship with Ty Lee, and Ty Lee in return he gives him not carte blanche authority, but he makes him a Navy commander a general in the Chinese army.
And you write about how this caused like major butthurt between Miles, who is a Navy officer, and the OSS, who are like, Bill Donovan's like, we should control this. We should be running this whole operation here. Like, why are you here? This doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, and and try to say no to somebody like Donovan.
Yeah.
Like my initial, when I had sort of structured the book, I desperately wanted to write about Donovan. I wanted to write a chapter about the Jedburghs or the operational groups. I thought, Donovan's such a rich character, to write about, to learn about. I just couldn't find a way to him except in this chapter. And then when I found myself, writing about him, I found myself like, he's not a bad guy. He's a great guy. He's an incredible American, but he's a schemer.
He fought a petty turf war in this.
Yeah,
theater.
he did.
Yeah.
I mean, and anybody that's ever written about Donovan knows that. I mean, Donovan's the one that started telling people that Hoover was the one that was dressing in women's clothes.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Yeah.
Even know
Well,
this.
Hoover was the one that was telling everybody that Donovan was sleeping with his daughter-in-law. I mean, they had this, ridiculous, I'm not sure that, there's not any truth to either. I mean, there might be some truth to both of them, but they were the ones that were pumping these rumors out.
Yeah.
Donovan's absolutely a schemer, and he was doing everything he could to, get rid of this, this obstacle, to him controlling China, and that's Mary Miles. Mary Miles. I mean, you'd see him at a restaurant. You wouldn't give him a second thought. If he was your mailman, you wouldn't think about him.
And how did things end up turning out in China with Miles? Like, again, these little vignettes that you write about in the book, where it's like a couple of his Navy dudes like tie limpet mines to their backs and swim out into the bay and like blow up some Japanese ship and all. Like, again, it's like I never really realized this stuff happened before.
Yeah, and they led. Yes, they lead cavalry. I mean, they blow up bridges. They rescue missionaries. They
The
blow
former
up ships.
UDT guys. Or
No,
the UDT guys.
these are a combination of Navy and Marine Corps advisors that the Navy sort of cobbles together into this unit called SACO. And SACO is the Sino-American Cooperative Organization. It's sort of meant to lead Chinese guerrillas. But it becomes so much more than that. It becomes like a testing ground for special operations, and they do ship attacks like you're talking about. They swim limpet mines up to ships, and they, when that one goes, they order 70 more limpet mines. They lead, like cavalry charges. Buck Halprin, who I talked about, the Jewish Notre Dame quarterback, he ends up leading like a cavalry campaign against the Japanese in the last 3 weeks of the war, like just harassing them at every possible ambushing him. It's incredible.
That's fascinating.
It's a totally unknown, corner of the war.
Yeah, and because they're off in like the western part of China, I guess, like you write about like just resupplying these guys and getting them whatever they needed was like incredibly difficult to fly that stuff in, and then it ended up getting carried on like pack mules at a certain point.
What were
some camps, so they created, I think it's 16 separate camps throughout China. And some of the camps you couldn't even get mail bags to until one river froze, and then you have to slide it down this river in a I can't remember I can't believe I'm stumping myself. Damn you!
Like a sled or something.
It wasn't yes, it was a sled, but I can't remember what kind of skin that they used in the mail bags. It doesn't matter, but yes, I mean they everything out there was, months removed from support. These guys were completely on their own. They did everything by themselves, and they managed to, tie down 600,000 Japanese soldiers. 600,000 Japanese soldiers that could have been fighting on Iwo Jima.
Yeah, right. Were the Flying Tigers supporting them at all?
That was before.
That was before?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was before.
That's fascinating.
I'd like to jump forward and talk about Watson, which is another character in your story. That this guy is like absolutely larger than life.
Yeah.
And
When people, yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
yeah. And well, I was just gonna. I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, but I think there's lessons to be learned between that and some of the things we did, or the CIA did early on in Vietnam, about when we try to repeat the Jedburgh process in Asian countries. Doesn't always turn out so well. But tell us about the chapter you wrote about him.
Yeah, Martin Watson. He is. You're right. He's a superhero.
Yeah, comic book
He's a
character.
comic book character.
Yeah.
He's a. He joins the. He grows up in Connecticut. He almost grows up in an orphanage. He's sort of raised by a grandmother and the the Catholic diocese, but he grows up. He's sort of a local tough. He gets beaten up by bullies, but he's in a part of the town that's part German, part Irish, so he learns to speak German and Irish, or French, Irish or German and French, and so when he joins the army in World War II, he's a very valuable guy. He joins the Rangers and he fights from North Africa all the way to Cisterna, where he gets captured with the rest of Darby's Rangers. He gets released. He comes home to Connecticut, and in between that period between World War II and Korea, he gets arrested some 76 times by the local police for various things: fighting, drunken fighting, resisting arrest. The judge ultimately gives him most of his incarceration is just done in jail, but the judge ultimately gives him a choice. You go back into the army or you're going to prison. He goes back into the army, rejoins the Rangers in the sort of the second iteration, and he leads in a sort of weird roundabout way. He gets put in charge of this sort of hybrid ranger, hybrid partisan, sort of Jedburgh type mission to go blow up a railroad tunnel. Lots of different factors come into play, and ultimately the mission is a total failure. Watson manages to get three of his American Rangers extracted, but he ends up leading his surviving Korean comrades on a 3-week-long, no food mission just to escape to friendly lines. He gets captured, and his POW story is nothing less than, it's remarkable. Like his survival during the it's.
The entire story about them, like basically like trying to E&E across Korea.
It's insane.
And it's snowing, and they're sending helicopters at one point after they finally get a commo check, and birds are going down, and like, what in the hell?
And I had a hard time finding, just writing that chapter because I couldn't find, the corroborative material to, write the chapter on. It was one of those sort of weird things, like I did a FOIA request for a POW record at the National Archives, and I just sort of hoping that there'd be a little couple-page summary of his captivity. I'd seen these POW reports before, and they were always just a couple of pages. The response was, yes, we have a POW report with Martin Watson's information in it. It hasn't been declassified. We'd be willing to declassify it, but you'd have to come here to get it. And I was like, well, I had just left the National Archives. I was living in Illinois at the time. It was kind of a big effort for me to get back to, Maryland. I was like, well, we can't send it to you. It's 750 pages.
Wow.
Well, I was like, well, it's in a. I assumed it was in a 750 page,
Right.
folder or something
Right.
like that. So I was like, all right, well, I'll look at it the next time I'm there. So the next time I was there, which is months later, and I'm still having trouble with this chapter, I requested the box, and they brought it out, and I was expecting to pull, his 2 pages out of it, and it was, no kidding, 750 pages all about him.
That's amazing.
Where they're trying to propagandize the GIs, and he was calling them commie sons of bitches.
That's where it all came from. That he was. I mean, and those everything from that chapter was taken from another POW. So they were interviewing POW after POW about Martin Watson. Like, tell us about him. Like, and if there's anybody that I write about in the book that is deserving of the Medal of Honor, it's Watson.
And this dude, after the war, it sounded like he went and lived a quiet life, working odd jobs, and
His epitaph is a bit more problematic than that. I didn't put it in there for sort of a reason. He had a rough go. He ended up dying of cancer. He had a few kids. His son was very helpful in the writing of the book. He ultimately realized, I think he realized that he was not able to live the sort of family life, and he sort of removed himself from the situation, went to Alaska to work on pipelines. When he got cancer, he came home, and he was able to kind of somewhat reconnect with his kids. His one son, I think he saw him 24 times or something like that, but every time his son would come to the hospital to visit his dad made him, knock out a password, and the password every time was courage.
it sounds like a guy who was, quite frankly, just damaged by the war. And the
By 2 wars, yeah.
Yeah.
He was absolutely damaged.
Being a POW, and I mean, the stuff that you describe in the book is horrific. I mean,
It's not-
anybody would.
Yeah, and it's not just the war that damaged. I mean, his whole childhood was
Yeah.
damaging. I mean, he had a horrific upbringing.
I mean, that's why he survived 2 wars, because he was a hardcore dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Refused to die.
Yeah, there's parallels, I think, between him and Bob Gallagher, who I write about later in the book. They have similar, like, orphan stories, and
Yeah.
similarly, Bob Gallagher didn't have like the legal trouble that Martin Watson had. Bob Gallagher's, every bit as, complicated and, just the trick. I think when you're, you want these guys in special operations, and you want these guys in the military. The trick is, how do you get a guy like that into the military,
Right.
and then maintain
Channel it.
Yeah, so they don't like Charles Shunstrom, who writes the report. Charles Shunstrom was one of the Rangers at Cisterna, and he's captured, manages to escape 3 weeks later, and writes a report about the Rangers' captivity, or the Rangers' capture at Cisterna. We wouldn't have a lot of the details that we have without his report, or at least the contemporaneous. He has a very troubled, he goes to Hollywood, tries to become an actor, I think, but fails. He ends up robbing liquor stores and banks and things, and ultimately, can't remember how he dies, but,
Probably
very
not well.
troubled. No, not well.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about getting into.
We don't have to end. I'm gonna have to need a facility break.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can take a facility break.
Yeah,
we
no,
can
that-
plug
that's okay.
our patron and everything. Because I mean, I know we're at 2 hours, but if you're here and if you're willing to kekeep talking, we're willing to keep asking.
I'll keep
questions.
going. Yeah.
Yeah, because this stuff is super interesting to me. Yeah, anytime you want to take a break, just let us know. I would like to talk a little bit about how that transition then post Korea. I mean, the birth of the SEALs, right? You didn't set out to write a book, but I mean, the byline is the rise of the Navy SEALs. When did that happen? That the transition where, I mean, the UDTs or guys are taken from the UDTs and created SEAL teams. How does that come about?
It's a period that happens after. So after Korea, after the UDT experience, it's sort of bigger than the UDT experience. It's the Navy's experience, post World War II. So after World War II, there's sort of a scrambling for resources, which always happens after a war. It's happening right now. But the creation of the Air Force and the the Army, the Air Force are convincing planners that there's not much need for a Navy anymore. The Navy can sort of just, sort of devolve into like a merchant marine almost. All the offensive capabilities are contained in the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Army. We probably don't need the Marine Corps anymore because the U.S. Army can do everything the Marine Corps can do. That's the idea. The Navy sort of goes through this period where it's, very, very self-consciously justifying its existence. Not only, are we not going to let the, Marine Corps sort of devolve into this junior partner, we're going to take a more aggressive, the Marine Corps gets, I don't know if it's an inappropriate aggressiveness, but they definitely are trying to get involved in any way that they can. So when probably the most aggressive chief of naval operations takes command, which is Arleigh Burke, he takes command in, it's under Eisenhower. I believe it's 1956 that he takes over. Arleigh Burke pushes the Navy, drives the Navy into creating a Navy that is every bit as connected to combat as all of the other, service branches, in all sorts of ways. He doesn't really come upon the SEAL concept until very, very late in his term as CNO. But there's nobody like Arleigh Burke that I came across. There's nobody that has his stamina. There's nobody that has his sort of hang-ups or his preoccupations or his commitment to keeping the Navy at the forefront of offensive combat. And ultimately, when he sees what's happening in the world, Lebanon's going off, Vietnam's going off, all these hot spots around the world, he's like, we need a force that can fight in sort of a guerrilla fashion. So he pushes his advisors to come up with creative ways to do this, and those advisors start to pull all those various experiences that have happened over the last 20 years into this single entity. And he pulls in, a really kind of diverse cast of characters to do this. One of the guys that he, pulls in and it got cut from the book is Arnold F. Shade. He gets put in charge of the Unconventional Activities Working Group. And Arnold F. Shade is, did you guys ever see the movie U-571?
Yeah.
You remember the scene where Bill Paxton, he's the commanding officer, he orders, Matthew McConaughey, who's the executive officer, Bill Paxton's in the water, he's gotten wounded, he knows that the submarine's in danger, he orders the submarine to submerge beneath his body. He knows he's going to die, and he orders his men to submerge beneath him. That really happened. That was the USS Growler. It happened in the Pacific. The commanding officer gets wounded on the deck of the submarine, and he's not going to be able to be pulled in. He's still on the deck of the submarine. He orders the men to submerge beneath him. He dies, and the executive officer that ordered that was Arnold F. Shade. And Arnold F. Shade is the person who's put in charge, that Burke puts in charge of this, committee, to develop the, where's the Navy going next. And Arnold F. Shade and the rest of the guys, they come up with this.
It honestly, though, if you look at it, I think from his perspective, like the Navy has a projection that nobody else has, right? You can have Air Force stations somewhere, you can have Army stations somewhere, but the Navy, right, they're projecting all the time,
right? And
then if they have these internal units that can conduct these small they have the Marines, but if it makes sense when you're looking at it, especially when he's fighting turf wars.
Right, you're right, and when you step back and you think about it, it's only inexplicable on the surface.
Right.
But yeah, when you step back and get a little perspective.
Yeah.
Because
No, I mean, you could say, well, why, they could take Marines on board, they could do this. But when he's fighting a turf war and he wants to be a one-stop shop, or he wants to, I mean, every aspect of government is always trying to get more power, right? Every aspect. And especially when different branches of the military, because if the Army's saying we don't need the Navy, because during World War II, the Army had more boats than the Navy, I think. Right? I mean,
Well, yeah.
larger, not now, but then, nobody wants to lose what they have.
no. But the only way, maybe not the only way, but in the one way that my book is somewhat controversial is that it goes sort of against this idea that the SEAL teams sort of created themselves. Like the myth that I grew up with, like when I was a young frogman, is that that it was sort of enterprising UDT guys that had come up with this idea for this unit in Korea, and all of these conventional Navy brass or Navy officers are like, no, we're not going to do that. We're a blue water force, and we're and then JFK comes along and supports these UDT guys, and they create the SEAL teams. It's all bullshit. The Navy created this force. The Navy created this force for a reason. In some instances, the UDT guys were against it.
Really?
The Navy created this because the Navy wanted to project its power, because the
Right.
Navy had gone through this 10-year period of being the last dog at the bowl,
Right.
and they wanted to get more involved. They wanted to be relevant.
And there's some really good chapters in this book. There's one about the Bay of Pigs, talks about the unique relationship between the UDTs and the CIA and paramilitary operations that I really think is worth people's time. There's a whole chapter about U.S. Special Forces, Colonel Yarborough,
Yeah, I thought. Yeah.
JFK coming down to like, again, a lot of stuff I didn't know about before that was really illuminating. I think to start to like wrap up this interview, though, I would like to kind of take us forward to the latter part of your book and talk about the SEAL teams in Vietnam when they really started to come into their own and show what they're capable of.
Yeah, they do. So I just talked about how the SEAL teams didn't create themselves. They didn't. They absolutely didn't. The Navy created the SEAL teams, but the SEAL teams weren't the SEAL teams until Vietnam. The SEAL teams become the SEAL teams because, the first detachment that gets sent to Vietnam, they get there and they really don't know what they're doing.
Right.
They've prepared for all the missions that they have anticipated. The dismantling trains, destroying command posts, landing from the shore, sneaking inland, doing some sort of commando operation, and then sneaking away. It's not until Vietnam they get to Vietnam and they realize there are no missions like that.
Right.
There are no command posts.
Right.
There are no railroad depots or anything like that. So they get there. The first detachment, the first commander, he says, "This isn't what we trained for." And he essentially confines the guys to base. Goes and he confines the guys to base. The Navy planners, they don't. They're really upset. They're ready to kick the SEALs out of Vietnam, and it's not until Phil Bucklew intervenes that he says, "Well, we'll replace the detachment, we'll replace the leadership, and we'll get a new detachment in there." And that new detachment comes in, and the same thing. They realize that this is not the war they trained for, but they also say, "Well, this is the only war in town. We're not going anywhere. We're going to figure out how to do this." And they stay. They go out night after night, and it's just trial and error. And by that trial and error, they figure out this works, this doesn't work, this is good, we'll keep doing that. And they sort of manage to figure out that, this jungle warfare is miserable, but there are ways to get it, to make it easier for us. And
how did they develop that? That's a huge sort of failure point, right? That's a big consequence for not getting it right. It's not a training exercise. Is anybody there helping them out?
Nobody's helping them out. They're completely alone, and they're in their own battle space. They don't have any. They have no support, and they have no. they have no framework. They've got no historical framework to go from.
Right.
They've got nothing. They get there. It's. I mean, at least when my unit got to Iraq, we had some sort of idea.
Right.
What guys had done before. They get there and they're like, well, I guess they just started doing patrol and ambush. It was really
But
the
even
only
that,
thing
as simple as the words patrol and ambush are, we know that it's not. You can't just give a farmer a gun and be okay. Now you're a soldier, right? Like there's a steep learning curve there. I mean, how do they? Were there a lot of casualties up top? Or like, how did they learn?
There were initial casualties. It was they knew that there were no replacements. They knew that they had to find some sort of method of operation that would make them incredibly lethal, but also not unduly risk the force.
Sure.
When Billy Macon gets killed, and Billy Macon is the first SEAL killed in Vietnam. His loss is almost a 2% loss for the entire team. Like, you can't take 10 Billy Macons and not completely dismantle the team. I mean, it's decimated at that point. So they needed some way to be really lethal against the enemy while preserving the force, and they ultimately settled on this intel-driven capture-kill raid. Like, gather as much intel as you can, and don't go out into the jungle to kill Viet Cong. Go out into the town, get as much intel as you can, and go and find that Viet Cong, that guy with a name. Mm-hmm. And then you bring him back, you ransack him for intelligence, and then you go back for the 5 other guys that he knew. And it wasn't until the 7th Platoon got there, and it was sort of this combination of Bob Gallagher and Pete Peterson, and just being relentless in the battle space, but all using all the lessons learned from the guys before. And I think probably the most important thing that makes the SEALs special on this entire period is that they deployed as a group. Mm-hmm. Nobody else was deploying to Vietnam as a group. Green Berets, LERPs, everybody. They were individually deploying to Vietnam. They hadn't trained together. They hadn't. They didn't know what each other looked like. They didn't know each other. They didn't have the same tactics. When they would get to Vietnam, they'd go out on a mission with guys they'd never been with before. I mean, and we know all these lessons now. We know that how damaging that is to a small unit. Mm-hmm. But at the time, they didn't know it. And the Navy, by virtue of the Navy, they deployed as a unit. They deployed as a ship. There were no individual augmentations that were going on in the Navy. It was you deploy with your unit. And I think that alone is probably the structural reason that the SEALs were so successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's really impressive to think that they're not coming from an infantry background. They're not coming from a background steeped with this sort of a knowledge base of land warfare, and they went out there and I mean,
but
really
they did.
kicked ass.
They learned it. And part of the reason that they learned it is from all of the, they got so much of this from Ranger School. I mean, I write in the book, like one of the weird twists of fate is that, all the Rangers, all the lessons learned that the Rangers get from World War II in Korea, they dump into Ranger School. Mm-hmm. But they don't create a Ranger regiment.
Right.
Not until 1974.
Right.
So all those lessons are getting passed to various guys in the U.S. Army who are going back to their individual, infantry units, airborne units, artillery units. The greatest concentration of Ranger School graduates ultimately becomes the SEAL teams.
Really?
Which is so bizarre and such a weird, anyway. And
so they were going into. I didn't know that they were going to the Ranger School.
Absolutely.
Prior to.
Yeah, SEAL. I mean, it was I was going through schools lists in the documents that I found for SEAL Team 2, SEAL Team 1. This guy's been to this school. This guy, how many guys are going to Ranger School every year? And there was like, oh man, you'd see like a high number of guys going to Ranger School, or high number of guys going to the Army Jungle Warfare School.
Yeah.
Like in all those lessons. I mean, from Darby to Watson to Army. No, back to somebody in the Navy.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
That's fascinating. Well, and now Ranger School is considered punishment in the teams, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's punishment, right?
But I mean, Ranger School is kind of punishment to everybody.
Yes.
I need to take a break or.
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
So, guys, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And if you want to support the stream, we have some links down in the description. You can jump onto the Patreon. We do bonus episodes.
We do amazing bonus episodes where Jack and Dee and I sit around and shoot the shit about nothing.
We also have other guests on the show.
Oh yeah,
Alex
the
Hollings.
guests, the guests are definitely worth.
Yeah, some other good dudes, and there's also some links down there for like the merch and other stuff. But yeah, I mean, please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop us a review on iTunes or wherever else you listen to these podcasts. Again, we really appreciate it, and that kind of stuff really helps the show grow.
Thanks for 40,000 subscribers.
Oh yeah, 40,000. Woot woot.
Yeah.
For those of you who weren't around way back when we hit 10,000, I'm pretty sure we said that at 50,000, Jack would dress up in Sailor Moon.
No, we did
cosplay.
not say that.
If you go back to the 10,000,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we did. Somebody can fact check me. But yeah, thanks everybody. We deeply appreciate it.
And next week, we're going to have the first Special Forces soldier who's in Afghanistan.
Justin.
Should be in studio. I'll confirm with him. And then the week after that, we're going to have a former CIA paramilitary officer on the show who wrote a book about another paramilitary officer who's kind of legendary in special activities. And then the week after that, we have a German special operations dude coming on the show. And then a Marine, a MARSOC raider. And then we have Doug Wise, who was another senior CIA officer. So that's what's coming up in May, in the end of April. So I hope you guys will join us for that.
Look, if you guys enjoy this show and enjoy the content, I haven't read this book, but I'm going to because everything we've talked about tonight sounds absolutely fascinating to me.
No, I honestly, honest to God, like Navy SEAL history aside, no, I'm just kidding. No, this is a really good book, and it's a really well-written book. I've read a lot of histories and different history books about the special operations world, and maybe this is the best written one. A lot of them are very kind of meandering. This one's very compelling, and like I said before, it includes a lot of history I didn't know about, and from what we've been talking to with Ben here, that's because a lot of this has never been published before.
I mean, there's stuff in here that you will read that. I mean, he did FOIAs for some of the stuff, so it's never even been
talked to
released
relatives
before.
and found documents in their attics and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah.
By Water Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the Navy SEALs by Benjamin Milligan. And it's on Amazon or wherever else you guys go to find books, so I really hope you'll check it out. It is really worth your time. And it's one of those books like I've said about Relentless Strike and some of the other books. Like if you watch this podcast and you're interested in this stuff, this is really kind of like a no-brainer. It's like the kind of book you should probably have on your shelf, and you should probably give it a read when you have the chance.
Yep, the link is in the description.
As soon as
Dave, what are you drinking over there on your side of the table?
my old standby, a little Lafroy.
I got the Hakushu single malt Japanese whiskey.
Suntory. It's Suntory time.
And Ben is over here drinking some Goose Island IPA.
Yeah, he said he's actually been to Goose Island a few times.
Really? I didn't know it was an actual place. I just thought it was a cool name of a beer. Guys, when Ben gets back in a minute, we'll have him answer your questions, okay? I know there's a couple in there.
Yeah, I was gonna pull those up.
Yeah,
wait to see
I scheduled Dale Comstock. I do need to confirm, get a secondary confirmation on it, but for the end of June. He's writing a book about his freelancer days.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dale's a good mammer jammer.
We also got Fred Galvin, who's a MARSOC officer, another dude who served in Rangers, Special Forces, and Enlisty, and a former head of CIA counterintelligence that's coming on in June.
Yeah.
So that's going to be pretty cool. And then I'm still working on July and August. But we do have Jim Morris coming on in July, who was he was an A-team leader in Vietnam, wrote for Soldier of Fortune magazine for many years, and he has a book coming out about his experiences post-war. The book is about his time in Vietnam, but it's also about his time post-war, experimenting with LSD. Yeah.
Which is funny that, back then it was experimenting, now it's treatment for post-traumatic stress.
I told him that, and he was kind of like, what the hell? Like, I had to do it illegally.
Right, right.
And now it's like an actual thing. But so, yeah, it is very interesting. So we'll be talking to him about that this summer.
So we're going to get to some questions real quick. Alejandro, thank you very much. If I remember right, tasking for missions in Siege of Soda in Iraq, because of mandate or if they missed the water, any mission near a body of water deeper than a shower stall went to the Navy boys. He said, haha, kidding.
Was that a question?
I don't.
That's a
think
good
so.
comment.
That may have been a smart-ass comment.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, regardless.
Yeah, Alejandro's a Ranger, so expect some heat. KJM, thank you very much. Look forward to reading your opus. Considering the show that is current SMO wars around the world. Oh, the show that is current. Okay. Any reflections in the book on lessons the war machine needs to learn or unlearn
That's a good
that
one.
has current relevance?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with this one. I'm not. One of the nice things about writing history is that you can kind of take cover in it. You don't have to. But if historians aren't going to, or I wouldn't even say I'm a historian, but I would say that. I think we're entering a new epoch, but like every epoch, it's going to have traces of what came before. And I know that we're going to make incredible mistakes in this. I mean, we're entering a new era of proxy war, with I think a sort of a heightened risk of nuclear war. I mean, I don't know if that is because we haven't. We don't have anybody in living memory that has experienced it. Has seen the firebombing of Tokyo or the trauma that we inflicted on Vietnam, and I mean this is real war. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is war prosecuted by a country that clearly doesn't have the same values that the West has, and they're, I mean. And they're, Putin has clearly telegraphed that, he's willing to do things that we're not. So finding our way in that environment is going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky not just for, special operations and the SEAL teams and everybody else, but it's going to be tricky for policymakers and everybody.
Yeah.
Ben, I got a question on that. I mean, what do you think of some of these, some might even call them legacy capabilities, underwater demolitions, subsurface, rebreather systems or whatever it is, scuba systems, coming ashore, airborne, static line, airborne insertions, or even MFF, free fall insertions. We've done very, very little of this in 20 years of war. And it could bring up the question, are these capabilities even relevant in modern warfare? Do we need to maintain these capabilities? Do they matter anymore? Will they matter in a future war in the Pacific?
Yes. I think they matter more now than ever. But I don't know how. I mean, I know that the expectation that Army Special Operations developed after World War II is that we were always going to have a partner force or not Army Special Operations, but Army, the OSS operational groups and the Jetbergs, they assume that we're going to have this partner force in any sort of country that we're going to invade, and we're going to have this, ready population of partisans to work with. And they, the Army Special Forces, they worked for 10 years until, Vietnam came along. And they get to Vietnam and there's no partner force. There's no, and parts because, the world had changed. Communism, was a much more persistent, or had a much more persistent police state than, the Nazis did over occupied France. There's nobody that you're going to be able to mobilize. But in that period, they didn't necessarily the skills that they had perfected. They didn't go to waste or anything. They ended up just serving another mission. They ended up being valuable in another way. Now I think naval special warfare is saying that it's transitioning back to the water now. We're going to get away from this counterterrorism, mission. We're going to transition back to the water. It's a sort of self-serving. I mean, it makes sense to do it, but it's a sort of self-serving,
Why
argument
we're still
to make.
relevant.
Yeah, but I mean, we're about to be. Our adversaries now all have, huge naval presences or huge coastlines that I mean, we and huge, shipping footprints and everything else. Like I think the ability to drop people, from a far away place to drop into the water and go someplace. It's more relevant now than it certainly was when I was working. I mean,
Right. Now that we're dealing with near peers that actually can project naval power, having the ability to counter that in such a specialized way.
Counter it, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to write the history of this period.
Yeah.
25 years.
Do you think there's a sequel to this book in the works from 1976 through the 80s, 90s, and War on Terror?
I have to go. No. No, I don't know. I mean, I no, there's not a sequel to that. I think this book, hopefully this book stands alone. There's other books. I don't know what the other books are. I'm in a, sort of a miserable time right now trying to figure out what the next book is. Like I think the worst thing that you can ever do is write a book. The only thing worse than that is to not write a book. Like I feel like now I'm sort of in a very, very anxious state at all times, like because I don't have this, this millstone around my neck. I got used to the millstone. I liked the millstone, and now I don't have it. And I don't know that I'll ever return to NSW as a topic, but I also said that I'd never write a book about NSW. Like I was always, like I said before, my passion, my interest was always that, that block of European history from, 1798 to 1918. But, the way to ensure that I'll write another book about NSW is to say that I'll never do it.
Right.
Again.
Is there anybody in this book that you would want to write about, that you feel that there's a story that needs to be told?
Lots of folks have asked me that, and there's probably fiction opportunities that I haven't thought of, and I've never written fiction. I'm not sure that I have the confidence to do it. But I tried to leave everything on the field, and even the stuff that I cut out, like there were sections. There was 20 pages here, 20 pages there that I would cut out, and they were brutal to cut out, like losing a relative, or not, but they were just, they sucked. You did so much work, but I, even in those parts that I ripped out, I tried to like just compress, like push all of that into like, if there was 20 pages of material, I tried to find the 2 sentences, that were representative of those 20 pages, So,
Well, if not fiction, I mean, would you ever consider a screenplay about one of these events that hasn't been told?
I'd be interested. I would talk to a person who did screenplays. I'm not sure that I have the. I don't have the chop. Any dialogue in that book. Oh gosh.
Hey, if you're a
There's
screenwriter,
definitely there's definitely chapters in this book that could be movies.
No, it sounds like. I mean, the
UDT chapters definitely.
It sounds like there's so many, and I look forward to reading the book, and there are so many fascinating stories in it. It sounds like there are a number of movies.
We're sort of just scraping the surface too in this interview. There's a lot more in the book, and that's why people should go and pick it up.
Yeah, you were gone when Jack said, but he said it's one of the best history books he's ever read. And Jack reads a lot of history.
Yeah, and there's like I said, there's a lot in this book that I didn't know about before. So, and as Ben pointed out, there's a lot of this is from primary sources. It has not been published before, so it's worth picking up. Let's get to the other questions.
I think that's it.
Really?
BPA
Okay.
Izzy, just thank you for your donation.
Dropped one in.
Said great. Oh, Alejandro dropped one.
Yeah. What direction do you see the teams going? What their mission set will evolve into or go back to include integration of cyber warfare capabilities at a platoon level? You answered a little bit of that, but is there anything you'd like to expand on?
Oh gosh. I don't know what's classified. I don't know what. So the one opportunity that the book has given me has been to be able to go back and connect with the teams. And I've gotten to, just such a great chance to go back and talk with guys and reconnect, and I want to be careful about not to say anything I shouldn't say.
Sure.
But I do. I mean, the question that he asked is the question that they're all asking.
Right.
And the one fascinating, or the one thing that I learned about this institution is that it's very adaptable.
Do you find that from the outside looking in, it seems as though the SEALs is the only special operations organization that consistently has the support of the parent force, as opposed to being at odds with it, because they're the only unit that does anything like that.
Right, and I think that has helped the SEAL teams time and time again. What price tag can you put on that?
Right.
It's never at the expense of the parent force.
Right.
It's never at the expense of an infantry, battalion or anything like that. It's SEAL teams stand alone, and they have full support from their parent service. It's slightly different with the creation of SOCOM. SOCOM has made the Navy sort of just like an administrative head of the SEAL teams, as opposed to an actual parent command. But I think the interesting thing that's happening right now is that with this radical U-turn that Naval Special Warfare is undergoing under its current leadership, and I don't think it's a bad U-turn at all. I think it's just it's a sign of the adversaries that we're facing. It's going to be what happens when two divorced people, get remarried? It's going to be a remarriage of of the Navy and the Navy SEALs. I mean, they're getting back together. Getting the band
back together again. Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities for the fleet and the SEAL teams to be working together right now, and I think I think they will. And I recently went to a luncheon where I heard the commander of submarine forces speak, and like the language that they're using right now. I mean they're fully anticipating that they're going to be the front line of any conflict.
Yeah.
Like the Navy is not anticipating being a subordinate force
Yeah.
in any future conflict. It's
I mean, and it makes sense why they think that. I mean, especially with technology developed the way it is. I mean,
and you've got in your two major adversaries have, the Chinese have a fleet that dwarfs ours now, and the Russians have a submarine fleet that is
And does it really dwarf us though? Like we have like what? How many aircraft carriers? They have one. We have like 8.
That's an expeditionary capability. You're right, absolutely. They can't project power the same way that we can.
Yeah.
But as far as numbers of ships, they are.
yeah. And it's sort of like we talked about. Like the SEALs are in a very they're in a great position where there's nobody else. Where in the Army you'll have SF, Delta, Rangers, and the conventional military, all competing for the battle space. The SEAL and the funding and the budget and the tech and everything else, and the SEALs don't have that kind of competition
Right now. But I mean, other special operations units have had all those same advantages at other times in our
Right.
history, and they've squandered it.
Right.
So we'll see what NSW does.
So with your grandmother's question and sort of what drove you to write this book, in the research and the writing process, do you feel as though you answered your question? Did you found and answered your question of what were the SEALs doing in inland Afghanistan?
You can't ask that question
4 beers in.
at 4 beers in
Fair enough.
with the emotional connection. You want me to cry on camera? Yes, I think I've.
If you cry, I'll cry. Well, I'll cry.
No, yes, I'm incredibly proud of the book. I'm incredibly proud of the. And I'm incredibly proud to have brought all of these stories, back to, I didn't know them. I know that, my readers didn't know them. I got somebody sent me a direct message on my Twitter account yesterday about their uncle, whose name was Seymour Owens, and he was the commander of the USS Norman Scott. Why that's relevant is in the invasion of Tinian, the UDT-7 was conducting a diversionary reconnaissance to draw Japanese attention away from the actual landing beaches. And UDT-7's role was incredibly important. They had to, swim ashore. They had to blow up obstacles. They had to make it seem like they were that the U.S., the Marines were going to be coming ashore at this beach. The only defense, well, not the only defense, but one of the defensive tools that the UDT-7 had was the USS Colorado, which is a battleship, and it's firing its guns into the Japanese shore guns, and or into the Japanese shore defenses. And in the process of that, Japanese guns managed to hit the Colorado right amidships, killing something like 47 of her sailors, sinking. The Colorado has to, get away from the battle. They've got to get out of the, the range of the enemy's guns. There was a destroyer skipper there, Seymour Owens, Commander Seymour Owens. He saw what was happening to the USS Colorado. He was the brother-in-law of Draper Kaufman, who is the commander of UDT-5. He knows that the UDTs are now exposed. They're ready to take all of this fire in the water. Mm-hmm. He also knows that the USS Colorado is sinking and has to get out of there. So what he does is he sails his ship, the Norman Scott, in between the Japanese guns and the USS Colorado, puts his ship in between them. And in the process, both defends UDT-7 and saves the Colorado, and he's killed. He's killed in the process, and so are something like 40 of his sailors. And being able to, and this guy, he texted me on this app, and he's like, "That was my uncle. I never knew why I knew that he died at at Tinian. I didn't know why he died." And just the fact that I was able to, find that story and put that in this book, and then, give some closure to.
Yeah, you never know how these stories are going to affect people. It's incredible.
But it's I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get the terminology wrong, but it seems to transcend the bounds of like a historian and like like an archaeologist, like you're digging up like you're
It's a living history.
You're presenting these things that may have been lost to history had nobody ever written this book or looked for those things. And it seems like there are so many of those types of stories in this book, and the I don't know, the honor that you've given these people that maybe deserve to be acknowledged and have not been up to this point is just amazing.
They do. They've been, But you're, It's a huge honor, and I'm proud to do it, and I miss doing it, and hopefully someday I'll get to do it again.
And this book it's a real credit to not just the SEALs, not just the Navy, but I think the U.S. military as a whole. And again, I mean, I think I've recommended it like 10 times on this interview so far. But again, hope you guys will check it out. Here it is, By Water Beneath the Walls. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ben, for joining us in studio. This is
Absolutely.
We're not
This
getting
is
paid to
fantastic.
plug them tonight, but Jack's eating some Boikies right now.
I know
'cause
people
we
tell
love-
me it's unprofessional
we
to
love
eat on the
Boikies.
podcast. But
Do you
I'm
like
hungry.
biltong?
I don't know what that is.
Do you like beef jerky?
I do.
You will love biltong.
Well,
Even
we have,
more
we have
so.
the chili and the traditional.
The chili's,
Chili's hot.
it'll light you up. But you will love this. It's so much better than beef jerky.
Thank you guys for having me on. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, man.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it.
And we'll